Welcome to the Bookworm Duo, where we explore a variety of books. Let's get started. You've shared this fascinating novella with us, Late Fame, by Arthur Schnitzler. It's about, well, a forgotten poet who gets rediscovered kind of late in life. But you'll see the journey isn't exactly what you might expect.
Yeah, that's right. The story, well, it starts by introducing us to Eduard Saxberger. He's a man almost 70 years old, and he's kind of settled into this, mundane life as a civil servant. And what's really interesting is how, completely he's just blended into this routine. It's like his past as a poet is this distant, almost forgotten thing.
It really makes you wonder how easily we can lose those passions, those things that we were once so excited about. Like, life has a way of, I don't know, kind of nudging us down a certain path, and sometimes we end up somewhere we didn't really plan to be.
Right, exactly. But then there's this turning point. We meet Wolfgang Meyer, this young and enthusiastic guy who's a member of this literary society called Enthusiasm, and he just happens to stumble upon Saxberger's forgotten poetry collection, Wanderings, and he's immediately captivated by it.
It's like a jolt, right? Meyer's discovery, it's this jolt to Saxberger's system. Like suddenly this part of him, this part he thought was gone, is reawakened. And all of a sudden, he's being praised and celebrated for work he barely remembers even writing. It's like he's watching it happen from outside. Not really sure how to connect this newfound attention with his current reality.
And it's not just Meyer either. He ends up introducing Saxberger to this whole enthusiasm group. And let me tell you, each member is, well, more eccentric and passionate than the last. There's Stoffner, he's kind of the leader, full of passion. Then there's Blink, the cynic, of course, and then Linsman, who calls himself the squashed man. They're like archetypes of, these aspiring young artists, each with their own little quirks and ambitions.
And they really push him, don't they? They insist that Saxberger has to be a part of their upcoming recital. And they just shower him with all this praise, putting him on this pedestal. It's almost overwhelming to imagine, especially for someone like Saxberger, who's lived this quiet, unassuming life for so long.
Oh, absolutely. And the way Schnitzler writes it, he captures the irony so well. I mean, here's Saxberger being praised for this work he can barely even remember, let alone create anything like it now. He's become the symbol of, well, past glory. But the question is, can he actually live up to the expectations of this very enthusiastic group? That's what really starts to drive the story forward.
Yeah, and this tension between what he achieved in the past and his reality now, it becomes even more clear when Saxberger tries to write a new poem. It's called Evening Moods, and it's supposed to be for the recital. But he struggles to find any inspiration. It's like that creative well that used to flow so easily. It just dried up.
It really shows you how complex the whole artistic process can be. It's not just about, willpower or having talent. There's a real vulnerability to creativity, a kind of fragility that can be so easily disrupted. Whether it's external pressures or, your own doubts, it can really throw things off.
Yeah, you're right. And Saxberger's situation kind of makes you think about those times in your own life, when you felt that pressure, the expectations, maybe even the fear of not being able to, I don't know, live up to something you've done before. It's something we all struggle with, I think.
Absolutely. And Schnitzler, he highlights this even more by contrasting Saxberger's experience with this enthusiasm group with a scene where he runs into an old friend, his name's Grossinger, and they meet at a restaurant. And Saxberger tries to tell him about all this newfound fame, but Grossinger, he's just totally indifferent. It's like a stark reminder that Saxberger is living in these two completely separate worlds.
It really drives home the point that fame, especially when it comes so late, can be this fleeting thing. And often, it just doesn't mean anything to people outside of, well, the specific circles where it's celebrated.
And as we go further into the story, we start to see Saxberger becoming more and more reliant on this actress, Ludwig Gesteiner. She's kind of become the one carrying the torch of his, revived fame. And she's interesting because she embodies this whole allure of recognition, but also the potential danger that comes with it. She's more drawn to this idea of Saxberger as this rediscovered genius than to, the actual man himself.
It's almost like she sees him as a way to achieve her own goals, right? Like a ticket to success. She wants to bask in the reflected glory of his past accomplishments.
Exactly. And that just adds another layer to Saxberger's whole journey. It's not just about his own internal struggles anymore, but also about navigating the motivations and desires of all these people who are suddenly drawn to his newfound notoriety.
And then, of course, there's the recital itself, this big event that everyone's been waiting for. It's kind of a pivotal moment in the story, bringing all these characters and their conflicting motivations together.
And the recital itself, it's quite a spectacle, like I don't know, a microcosm of the whole literary world and all its, absurdities. Linsman gives this fiery speech. Stoffner, well, his performance is a little over the top, you could say. And then there's Gasteiner. She really captivates the audience with her reading of Saxberger's poems. It's all very dramatic. But there's this subtle irony woven throughout each performance. You start to see their insecurities, their hunger for recognition. It's all right there on the surface.
Yeah, it's like they're all putting on a show, right? Playing these roles for each other and maybe even for themselves.
Exactly. And it's funny because Saxberger, the guest of honor, he almost becomes an afterthought in all of this. I mean, he's there physically, but his mind seems somewhere else. Like he's detached from the whole thing, the adulation, all the spectacle.
Yeah, you can really sense his disillusionment growing. Like he's realizing that the enthusiasm group, well, they're more enamored with this idea of him, this rediscovered genius, than with the actual person he is now.
And it all comes to a head when, well, Saxberger is kind of basking in the applause and you overhear someone whisper, "Poor devil." It's this small moment, but it's really devastating. It just shatters the illusion, exposes how shallow all this adulation really is.
It's like that whisper is this pinprick, right? It just deflates his ego and forces him to confront the reality of the situation.
Right. It's a reminder of all that external validation. No matter how much you get, it can disappear so quickly. And ultimately, if it's not based on a real connection, a true understanding, it just doesn't mean anything.
And that realization is just compounded by everything that happens after the recital. There's this really scathing review that gets published, and it just throws the whole enthusiasm group into chaos. It exposes how fragile they are, all the cracks in their little facade of unity.
The review is like this catalyst, it brings all their internal conflicts to the surface. You see their insecurities, their different views on art, how they see recognition. Stoffner, the leader, he actually lashes out at Meyer, accusing him of betraying the group.
Oh, wow. And then there's the tension between Christian, the playwright, and Linsma, the squashed man, right? They're both competing for Gasteiner's attention.
Yeah. It becomes clear of the enthusiasm group, even though they all supposedly share this passion for art, it's really just a bunch of individuals, each with their own ambitions and insecurities. That whole idea of unity they had, it was an illusion all along. And it all falls apart so easily.
And poor Saxberger, he's caught in the middle of all this. It's like he's this bystander to their drama, a pawn in their game.
Exactly. And he starts to realize that he never really belonged there. That this whole late fame thing, it was just a reflection of their needs, their desires. It's a painful realization, but it also leads him to make a pretty big decision.
He decides to walk away from it all, right? To leave the enthusiasm group behind and cut ties with this world that, well, promised him so much, but ultimately gave him very little.
It is. And what's really interesting is that it's not presented as a defeat. It's more like a victory.
Yeah.
He's reclaiming his agency, rejecting all those empty promises, and choosing to find fulfillment on his own terms.
Yeah, it's a pretty powerful moment, isn't it? This whole decision to step back from the spotlight. To reject that allure of, well, late fame and just go back to that life he had before.
It really is. And what makes it even more interesting? It's not like it's portrayed as him giving up or anything. It's more like, well, it's a kind of victory. Like Saxberger isn't giving up. He's choosing a different path, one that's more about, authenticity and genuine connection than chasing recognition.
Yeah, he's basically saying, I'd rather have the real thing. Like he's trading in the superficiality of that whole enthusiasm group for the comfort and acceptance of his old friends back at the restaurant. The people who knew him before all this late fame stuff happened.
Exactly. It's like he's going back to his roots, realizing that true belonging, it doesn't come from, strangers praising you. It's about those simple, everyday interactions, the people who know you and accept you for who you really are.
It's like a reminder that sometimes the best path is the one that leads you back to, well, back to yourself, back to those things that really matter, like your values, your relationships. Those are the things that give you a sense of, grounding and purpose.
It's funny because Schnitzler, he uses humor and satire throughout the whole story to really drive this point home. I mean, think about the enthusiasm group. They're so obsessed with Saxberger's work, but most of them, they haven't even read Wanderings, They're more in love with the idea of him than the actual poetry. It's a pretty satirical look at how the literary world can be sometimes.
I know, right? Like they're more interested in the recovered genius than the actual person.
Exactly. And then you have Linsman, this self-proclaimed squashed man. He's always complaining about not being successful, but he's totally dependent on other people for money. It's like he's a caricature of that whole struggling artist thing, more concerned with appearances than actually creating anything.
Even the recital, right? It's so over the top. And then that review that tears them apart, it all has this satirical edge to it. Like, Schnitzler is poking fun at the whole literary world and their obsession with validation and recognition.
Yeah, but that humor, it's not just for laughs. It has a deeper purpose. It makes you question, you know, your own ideas about art and fame and all that. It's like he's saying, look beyond the surface.
So it's more than just a story about, one guy and his experience with fame, right? It's about so much more. It's about what it means to be human, our desire to belong, our relationship with success and failure, and how hard it can be to find real fulfillment.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that while recognition can be nice, it often disappears just as quickly as it came. True fulfillment comes from, well, from inside, from doing things that align with your values, and from those genuine connections that give your life meaning.
Yeah, it's a timeless message, really. And Schnitzler does such a beautiful job of telling this story. It stays with you long after you've finished reading it, makes you think about your own life, what you want to achieve, and what really matters.
I agree. It's a story for anyone who's ever had a dream, questioned their path, or struggled with, ambition and belonging. And in a world that's so focused on superficiality and instant gratification, Late Fame offers this quiet but powerful reminder. True fulfillment, it's often not found in the spotlight. It's in those quiet moments, those authentic connections, those times when you really discover who you are.
Thanks for joining us. Subscribe for more bookish adventures and hit that like button if you enjoyed the ride. Don't forget to share the knowledge, spread the word.